Hello everyone, I'm Wade Pogany, Executive Director of the Associated School Boards of South Dakota, and we want to welcome you to our series of videocasts talking about school board meetings. And this issue deals with the topic of conflicts of interest that board members might run into from time to time. With me today are Gerry Kaufman. Gerry is Director of Policy and Legal Services, and Dr. Randy Royer. Randy is in charge of board development. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on this topic. It's really an important topic to talk about conflicts of interest that board members get into sometimes, and so we want to educate them a little bit about that. Gerry, when a board member is elected to office, they can only sit on one office of local government at a time. They can't be a school board member and a county commissioner at the same time. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's a specific statute that says no elected official for a county, municipality, or the state may also serve at the same time as a school board member.
And why is that? What reason do we have for that statute?
Well, the statute goes on to say, refer to positions that are incompatible or inconsistent with each other. And because each one of those governmental entities has their own focus, there can be conflict or incompatibility situations between the two. Probably the primary example is taxing authority. Municipalities have taxing authority, counties have taxing authority, townships have taxing authority. And a classic example of that is with tax opt-outs. And so if a school district wanted a tax opt-out and a board member was a county commissioner, they may have a different view on that tax out issue. And so when you get into those kinds of situations, the law is very clear. You just don't cross the lines.
So different kind of seats on different boards can have conflicts of interest even among themselves.
Correct.
Great. Okay. Randy, when you served as a school board member yourself, and you served for many years, did you ever experience a situation where there was a conflict of interest, especially maybe in a contract situation?
Yes, we had one recently before I got off the board. We had a board member who was a part of an engineering firm, and that firm was going to be contracted to do some preliminary work on a new elementary school. And it was discovered that there was a conflict of interest there. So the board member, during that discussion and that vote, excused himself, was not part of that discussion or part of that issue at all.
Because they had a personal interest in that, or
Obviously,
could have had a personal interest in
yes,
that.
and we hired his firm then to do that work for us, and that was a contract that he could not be part of that decision-making process.
And they weren't part of the decision?
They weren't.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Gerry, what does the law say regarding school board members and approving contracts around conflicts of interest? What does the law specifically talk about?
The specific statute that's what we call the General Conflict of Interest Statute, and it says no member of the governing board, in this case the school board, may be directly or indirectly involved in any contract for labor, services, equipment, supplies, involved in the interest of real estate sales of school district property or anything like that. And the law goes on to say any contract that is entered into by the school district in violation of that statute is void.
So they really have to be very careful about those specific elements then, and not getting involved in that if the school district is involved in that. Because the school district really is a business for the most part.
Well, it's in the business of educating students for sure. And the conflict of interest statute, though, I would be remiss if I didn't add that there is also another statute, the following statute, that does have 8 specific exceptions to the general rule conflict of interest. And they are very specific, and if a board member's situation would fall into one of those, then it's possible that it's not a conflict of interest.
Can you give me an example of maybe a common exception that board members would run into?
Probably one of the most common situations is the very first exception under that statute is that if there's a contract for $3,000 or less, even if the services or labor are elsewhere available within the school district, it's not a conflict for the school board member to provide that service or product or whatever. A classic example is maybe a substitute teacher or a substitute bus driver. As long as that individual does not earn over $3,000 in the school fiscal year, the law grants that exception.
Or say a coach.
Or a coach would be another example, yes.
So that there's a cap there, and it wouldn't be a conflict of interest as long as they're under that $3,000.
That is correct. There are other exceptions under, if bid laws are followed and things like that. There's, like I said, 8 specific exceptions that maybe would fit an individual situation.
Yeah. Randy, can you give an example of a situation where a board member might experience a conflict of interest in a board meeting, for example?
Well, say a board member is negotiating with the Teachers Association for contracts, and his wife is a teacher in the district. If it was me, I would avoid being part of that negotiations team and wouldn't participate at all until maybe the final vote of ratifying the contract. Because otherwise, again, it could be the appearance of a conflict, but certainly there might be some substance there as well.
If I may, another example might be when a student discipline issue comes up for possible student expulsion. Of course, if it's the board member's child, automatically, recusing themselves, not being part of that decision. But it could be a nephew or niece, maybe a child of a very close friend, okay? The idea is you avoid the conflict of interest potential in those kinds of situations.
So Gary, when I recognize that as a board member, I have a conflict of interest, what does the law say I should do? Specifically, what should I carry out?
Well, if a board member recognizes that he or she has a conflict of interest or a potential conflict of interest, one, be familiar with what the rules are. No direct or indirect financial interest, no direct or indirect personal interest, and if they believe that they have a conflict of interest and cannot be fair and impartial.
Those are the key words.
Key words, fair and impartial, disinterested in what's going on. They are there as a governing board member, then they should recuse themselves, from that discussion, and that can be done several ways. One is at the very beginning of this discussion, they should make it known to the other members of the governing board and whoever is there, as viewing the governing board action and say, I'm excusing myself from this discussion and vote on this issue, and a lot of times they will say, and this is why. And they will remove themselves from the governing board table and maybe go out in the hall or someplace else. So they're just not involved. The other way, so that can be then recorded by the business manager in the minutes. The other way to get it recorded in the minutes that this governing board member is not involved is if there is a vote, then it's a roll call vote, and if I was a board member, when my name was called, I abstain. So it's very clearly on the record that I am not participating in the discussion or voting for or against whatever is before the governing board.
So the real issue then for a board member is just you can't be part of that decision, and that's what it really comes down to.
And the discussion is really excuse yourself from that because you could influence other board members' decision on that. So you don't want to participate in that either.
Right. Anything else that we would caution board members about relative to conflicts of interest?
Well, board members also have a responsibility to identify conflicts of other board members. And there is a mechanism to deal with that. If they recognize that, 2/3 of that board then can identify that conflict of interest and say that board member cannot participate in the voting or discussion of that issue.
So if I, as a board member, may not recognize the conflict, and other board members do, then there's a process for that too.
Exactly.
Gary, what does the law say about
And
that?
and Randy is correct. The statute is SDL 6-1-17, and it specifically says that 2/3 of the governing board may vote to exclude the other governing board member from discussion and voting on a topic. And so that would require a motion by a governing board member, a second by governing board member, and then a vote. And if it's a 5-member board, all of their votes are critical, so 4 of the 5 governing board members would have to say that this governing board member, in the opinion of 2/3 of the governing board, has a conflict of interest, and then they are excluded by law from the discussion and vote on that topic before the board.
Great. Anything else that you would add to caution board members about with conflicts of interest?
I would also add that sometimes it's not so much the substance of an issue, but it's also the appearance. And it's a matter of integrity of the board members individually as well as the board as an entity, as a whole.
Yeah. So this is really an important issue for board members to pay attention to and really take heart of.
Very definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for taking the time to join us from ASBSD.